Good evening everyone, welcome to an Aussie Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update. Tonight the 5th of February 2014, my name's Chris Nitzo. Tonight we're going to be talking about Fletcher, we're going to be talking about a trough system or weak low that might affect the Queensland coast, and we're going to be talking about another Northern Territory low which will eventually go into Western Australia and possibly form into a cyclone off the coast or remain a fairly strong tropical low. And we'll also talk briefly about the Broome low, which is not expected to do too much at all. Alright, let's get in. Alright, earlier today, Tropical Cyclone Edna redeveloped and actually became a Category 2 system. It's pushing way out here to the south-southeast way too quickly to be coming back anywhere near the Queensland coast. So she's gone, she's off to New Zealand or into that South Pacific region. We have ex-tropical cyclone Fletcher here. I don't know what he's trying to do. He's not really well-structured low anymore. About last night, it got, or yesterday afternoon, it got smashed with wind shear, and it really hasn't recovered. The Bureau still have a tropical cyclone warning out for that region, but it's going to really struggle to get itself going. It needs to redevelop that convection around the centre to do so. If it remains over open water long enough, it may reform, but at this stage, don't hold your breath. Alright, looking at the Northern Territory, we see a very slow-moving tropical low. It's got better structure than both Edna and Fletcher, but it's located well and truly over land here in the western parts of the Northern Territory. Now that low will sort of be slow-moving, move towards the Gulf a little bit, and then sort of track back to the west out here towards the Kimberley or Pilbara coastline. Now, if it gets offshore, it may have a reasonable chance of becoming a cyclone. If it stays onshore, obviously it's just going to be a massive rain producer. It's already a massive rain producer in through the inland parts of the Northern Territory. Some massive flood or massive flooding going on in there in parts of the territory. And as we also are watching a tropical low developing just off the coast of Broome, going to push in a westerly direction, not expected to deepen significantly, but you never know. With lows out here in the southeast Indian Ocean, you're a brave man to bet against them. Alright, looking out here also in the Coral Sea, we have another tropical low, or a very, very weak surface feature. It's going to basically form into a trough line here. Forget about Edna, she's gone. It's going to form into a trough line, and it's going to push back towards the coast. Now, on the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, we should be seeing some fairly decent rain out of that on the Queensland coastline. Looking at the statewide radar, there's really very little structure to that ex-cyclone Fletcher there. But we are seeing some very good rainfall falling on the North Tropical Coast in the Queensland region, and just really along the Gulf and the Western Peninsula we're seeing just general rainfall. If we head to the Northern Territory and the Kimberley of WA, we can see, thanks to weatherzone.com.au for this radar imagery by the way, we can see the tropical low here spinning around to the west of Elliot, and it's really quite a lot better structure than Fletcher does at the moment, and we'll see that low continue to be a feature and will be the dominant feature over the north. And where it exactly tracks though is a little bit doubtful in the long term. But really, this one, if it can maintain its structure and get off the coast, it could form into a cyclone. Time will tell. Off the coast of Broome, we haven't seen it yet, but we'll see a weak surface feature form. It could just be more of a convergence line. It might be a very weak low. It'll push out to the west. If it does form into a cyclone, it is very unlikely to affect the coast at any point. In fact, the latest information on Fletcher, I apologise, the first part was recorded before I had this information. The latest information on Fletcher is that it is now no longer subject of cyclone warnings, and once again, I showed you the structure there. It's pretty terrible. It's very unlikely to form into a cyclone now. It's going to push southwards. It may push southwards far enough to give that parched northwestern region of Queensland a little bit of a drink, but don't count that yet. It is looking very, very raggedy at the moment, and it may not survive another 12 to 18 hours yet. So if it doesn't do that, then it's not going to bring that rain southwards, obviously. Just to put Queensland minds at ease, Edna is all well and truly gone. She's not coming back towards Queensland. The latest guidance on that suggests it's a pretty well done deal. Very tight agreement in the model guidance here of a south to southeast push, possibly affecting the North Island of New Zealand by day 4 or 5. and really not coming back in any way. Although what we will have is a trough system out here in the Coral Sea, and it will push back to the west, and it is very likely to cause some moderate to heavy, maybe even heavy rain, but moderate rain at this stage along the coastline, anywhere from about just around Bundaberg northwards all the way through to the far north tropical coast eventually. So look folks, over the weekend and into early next week there is going to be a little bit of rain here. We don't expect that low to form into anything too significant in terms of cyclone development. We'll have a look at what some of the guidance suggests about this. So the Bureau of Meteorology model, thanks to Weather Zone for the graphics, we see the tropical low that we're talking about up here in the northern Coral Sea. We see it. We see a trough system in through the Coral Sea by the Friday, and then by Saturday that trough system starts to push westwards and possibly impinging on the coast around the central coast region, and eventually the trough system continues west, although it won't show up on this model. It'll continue west, and once again you could see, as I say, moderate to heavy falls of rain, particularly on the central coast of Queensland, possibly extending into the north coast of Queensland in the longer term. So here is the Coral Sea trough system on the UKMet model. You can start to see the rainfall by Saturday morning, just getting close to the coastline there in the central coast region, and all the way down to just south of Bundaberg. So as I say, could be a decent rain producer. And look, some of that rain may actually penetrate a fair way inland in the medium term as well. So it's certainly something the farmers and the graziers will be very interested in, as to how far west that rain does push. We have different varying model guidances on this. Some of them suggest it's going to push a long way west. Some of them suggest it's going to remain pretty coastal. So if you take a look at the GFS model at to 3 days, on the Saturday we see some of that moderate to heavy rain starting to hit the coast, sort of Rocky, just north of Rocky, and also starting to see some rainfall all through the North Tropical Coast and possibly the Herbert, Libertic and Central Coast with Sundays. At this stage on the GFS model suggests it doesn't start for them yet, but it will eventually for those guys as well. And as we push out to day 4, which is the Sunday, we see a lot of that rain spreading westwards into the central interior of Queensland, and also some of that rain seeping into the northwestern interior of Queensland from ex-Fletcher. So really, as I say, nothing too heavy, but hopefully fairly broad rainfalls from the GFS model predicted will come true. We don't need flood rainfalls, but we do need broad soaking rains. And then out to Monday, we continue to see that rainfall all through Queensland. Once again, not overly heavy, although the model does suggest perhaps a little bit heavier towards the southwestern part of Queensland there on the Monday. But overall, just a nice soaking light to moderate rainfall throughout the state, which would be fantastic. Looking at the tropical cyclone formation probability product, though, we still see an element of likely or possible cyclone formation out here in the northeast Coral Sea. So just because the model guidance is suggesting that it's going to be a weak trough feature, doesn't mean we can't stop watching it just yet. There is still that likelihood or that potential for a tropical low that is located out there to spin up, and spin up pretty rapidly on a fairly strong monsoon trough. So we'll keep an eye on it, but at this stage model guidance is saying no way. However, models have been wrong before, especially in the Coral Sea. So we will keep an eye on it, and we'll keep watching as it forms over the next 24 to 48 hours. But as I say, the most favoured outcome is for that low to push fairly rapidly westwards and broaden out into a trough feature. Also, some reasonable guidance suggesting that conditions remain reasonably favourable, not overly favourable, but reasonably favourable for whatever's left of Fletcher to reform out here in the southeastern Gulf. Once again, though, we need to see Fletcher start to take a little bit more shape than he's taking at the moment. Otherwise, he's a goner. So that's probably why the Bureau hasn't got the tropical cyclone advice as current anymore. I guess the big one we now have to keep an eye on is this tropical low in the Northern Territory and what it's going to do over the next, I guess, 3 to 7 days. So here's where it was this morning. Tomorrow morning we see it just shifting slightly to the west, but remaining reasonably stationary. It's got a fairly strong monsoon shown by this yellow colouring out here to the north, and a fairly strong ridge shown by this yellow colouring down here to the south. So once again, the big issue we have here is when we have a monsoon northwesterly hitting a southeasterly here, we're going to see a lot of vorticity, a lot of spin. Spin creates lower pressure, and so therefore, once again, we are looking at this system. If it maintains structure and starts to push in a westerly direction under the influence of this ridge, that it could form into a TC once it gets off the coast of the Kimberley. Should I say, if it gets off the coast of the Kimberley. As we head to Friday, we see it making a run for it. We see it making, basically backtracking from where it came from. Remember, this is the same low a couple of nights ago. We were talking about how beautiful it looked when it hit the coast here south of Wadair. It sort of looks like it wants to backtrack back to where it came from. And so this is what we have Friday. On Saturday, it becomes slow moving once again. Big ridge to the south, big monsoon to the north, creating a ton of rain for the Northern Territory coastline. So it sort of just sits there teetering between a westerly and an easterly steering influence. Same thing on Sunday, doesn't move much, and so once again, remember, if it does this, we're going to see massive rainfalls over the territory through a large area of the territory if this sort of thing eventuates. I guess with a deterministic run, what it then does is it pushes the system in a more southwest direction in the medium term and into the NTWA border, and so we start to see an easing of that rainfall over the territory and a more centralised rainfall region over here in the Kimberley region and just to the south of the system where the greatest convergence will lie. And by Tuesday, we see it trying to make a run for that coastline around the Pilbara, East Pilbara or Southwest Kimberley coastline. Now, when we take a look at the ensemble guidance from the Euro, we see that by next Tuesday, there's a fair error margin as to where this system could be located. So it could be located well offshore here, and if it does go offshore, it may have a reasonable, probably a moderate potential, we would think, of becoming a tropical cyclone. Conditions aren't fully favourable for it, but they're not fully unfavourable either. So really it will be dependent on exactly when it gets off the coast, if it gets off the coast firstly, sorry, then when it gets off the coast as to what conditions will be like at the time. Conditions become progressively more unfavourable the longer it will take to get off the coast. And so as we see on Wednesday, we have a fair error margin here. The system could be located very close to the Pilbara coastline, could be a cyclone or could be a low at that point in time. So really, folks, that becomes our interest area now, is this Northern Territory low pushing westwards and reforming or possibly forming into a cyclone if it gets off the coast, or if it doesn't and just tracks just inland of the coast. Once again, we could be seeing a large swathe of heavy rainfall all up and down this inland region of Western Australia, with some of it getting onto the coastline as well. So what does all that rubbish look like on some high resolution imagery of the satellite winds and the surface winds? We can see that the tropical low located there, this is using the GFS model tonight. As we head to Thursday night, we see the low hasn't moved very far, just like what I showed you on the Euro. We also see X Fletcher still remaining a feature there in the Gulf, but not deepening significantly. As we head to Friday morning, we see the system getting close to the JBG, and we show that to you using the Euro as well. So very clear model agreement here between the Euro and the GFS on this particular system, although there isn't clear agreement here on the X Fletcher system, with the GFS keeping it offshore. But overall, with this NT system that we're looking at, there is very clear agreement. As we head to Friday, we see the system very close to the JBG, starting to produce possibly gales to its north. We also see that low here on the southeastern Gulf of Carpentaria coastline. As we head to Saturday morning, we see once again the system remains almost stationary, pushing a lot of rainfall onto this northwestern top end coast. Interestingly, with the GFS model, we actually see Fletcher reforming into a tropical cyclone, or a minimal tropical cyclone there on the Saturday. Now that's very doubtful, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. On Saturday night, we see that the system now located over the far northern Kimberley, and on Sunday morning, we see the system tracking to the west. We also see that little broom low that we've been talking about the last couple of nights, but really not doing anything. And look, the Euro and the GFS really are not intent on doing much with this at all. They're much more intent on doing something with this tropical low. Whether or not it gets off the coast, though, is the key as to whether it can possibly form into something significant like a cyclone. As we head to Sunday night on the latest GFS, we see that it's really stuck in that North Kimberley coastline, and then as we head to Monday morning, it really doesn't move. So it's just really just pummeling people with rain, which is fantastic, but I think it's falling in the wrong areas. This area of the coastline has had a lot of rainfall, and it's more the northwestern parts of Queensland that haven't had the rainfall, and unfortunately it's not producing it for them. And as we head through to Tuesday afternoon, we see the model start to do some silly things with a couple of lows here. Fletcher pushing it straight in towards Ayers Rock, Alice Springs area, and this low remaining fairly stationary in the Kimberley as well, so not really doing anything. If we change that up and we look at the European model, we see that the European model by next Tuesday afternoon has it much closer to the Kimberley-Pilbara coast. Remembering obviously that being closer to the coast, it'll have a lot more fetch of northwesterlies coming on shore, so we see a lot more rainfall here on the Pilbara and the Kimberley coastline, not really the Pilbara yet. It needs to push a lot further southwards to get onto the Pilbara coastline. So if we track the system a little bit longer, we see that it does start to get a little bit further to the south, but also gets a little bit further inland. So anywhere sort of east of Headland looking at some good rainfall, and anywhere west of Headland looking at some patchy falls. But once again, it really does depend on where the actual thing goes, its exact track. Just briefly mentioning the Broome low that sort of forms just off the coast of the West Kimberley here on the Friday. There it is, Friday night. It's just a real trough system, just a little troughy convergent area. It does show some signs of rotation as we head towards Saturday morning, and there it is there. It's showing some signs of rotation, but it's reasonably weak. And not really expected to fire up. Even with such a strong monsoon in behind it, it's still, the models are really not intent on firing this system up into anything significant. And you can see here it just sort of sits off the coast until it eventually just washes out around Monday. Not really doing anything for anyone, so it's not producing rain because it's too far off, and it's not becoming a cyclone because it doesn't have really favourable conditions. So once again, folks, all eyes have to be on this system here in the Northern Territory pushing to the west. The worst case scenario is you're getting a lot of rain. Best case scenario, we see a nice little cyclone off the coast, as well as the rain. So tomorrow's rainfall, where are the models suggesting we're going to see the rain? Anywhere north of about Ingham on the Queensland coast is going to see some showers, some heavy showers at that on the Cairns region. Once again, we're seeing that already. That'll continue tomorrow by the looks of the model guidance and push up into the Northern Peninsula. Also the West Peninsula receiving a lot of rain with regards to Fletcher, still loitering and hanging around the region. Some of that rain seeps into the northwestern parts of Queensland too. Also, we're seeing the central parts of the Northern Territory receiving some moderate to heavy falls of rain, with that low just sitting there, not doing much. And that low is pushing in a fairly strong northwesterly monsoon to the north of it. So the top end coastline, the northwestern coastline of the Northern Territory receiving some fairly good rain. Also, the Kimberley region receiving some fairly good rain too in that little weak trough. On Friday, we see that the little weak trough off the Kimberley or near the Kimberley coastline forms into a very weak low or trough further offshore, which means it takes a lot of the rain away with it. The Gulf of Carpentaria low could still be a feature, so we could be seeing some fairly heavy rainfalls all across this region. Also, the northwestern coast of the territory remaining very active, and we see the tropical low remaining in the area of the NT, and so not doing much and producing a lot of rain. That rain remains anywhere north of about Ingham, fairly moderate to heavy falls still throughout this period. As we head to the weekend, this is where things get a little bit more interesting for parts of the Queensland coast, where we see generally those showers now are extending further south towards about the Townsville area. We see still some moderate falls in the Cairns region, and we see some moderate falls now developing along the central coast. Now remember, that's due to that weak low and trough in the Coral Sea pushing to the west, and we also have a continuation of very heavy rainfall in the Gulf Country region, and also extending west into the NT. Look, these falls may be slightly underestimated here because some of the guidance does different things with the NT low, but if it does what's most favoured and remains in this region, these rainfalls here are being probably underestimated at this point in time, so do take them with a grain of salt. The Queensland falls we're pretty confident on. We're going to see those light to moderate, even possibly moderate to heavy falls on that coastline. And Sunday we start to see even more interest in the Queensland coastline, where we see moderate to heavy falls along the central coastline, extending all the way through to the North Tropical coast. Once again, really the cutoff point for that is around the Bundy area. Anywhere south of that, very, very light falls. Anywhere north of that, could be seeing those moderate to heavy falls. The good news here is a lot of that actually seeps well inland, so not, once again, not drought breaking, but it's at least some fairly generalised falls of 5 millimetres or so in that area, and at least it keeps the evaporation at bay. Over the Gulf country, still remaining very, very active, and that pushes into the central parts of NT. Now be aware, once again, if that low decides to track in a westerly direction, we'll start to see a big increase in rainfall out here in the North Kimberley that may not be showing in this model guidance. So the next 4 days of rain looks pretty cool if you're anywhere north of about Bowen, possibly anywhere north of about Mackay actually. It looks pretty good in the Queensland region, and that extends all the way west. So if you're west of a line from about Bowen to Mackay westwards, you could be seeing some fairly decent rainfall over the next 4 days. Then also that basically extends right across Australia here to, if you're anywhere sort of just to the south of Broome, along the western coastline, you're going to see some rainfall too. So most of the northern, or all the northern half of the Northern Territory, will see some good rain out of this too. The Gulf country obviously is where it's all at though. We could be seeing up to 1/2 metre of rain in the next 4 days. The 4 days after that, we see some more rainfall starting to look like penetrating into the inland parts of Queensland, which is great news for the farmers. Now, please, please, please don't take this to the bank. This is days 4 to 8, and it does change quite rapidly. But there are some good signs there that the trough pushing west from the Coral Sea merges with a bit of a trough over inland Queensland, and we actually see some fairly widespread moderate falls along the inland regions of Queensland. We'll see some moderate to heavy falls on the coastlines as well, 50 to 100, possibly even more than 100 in some parts of the coastline of Queensland. As we head to the Gulf country, remaining very active here, some very heavy rain seeping into the central parts of the Northern Territory as well. The top end coastline remains very active. The Kimberley remains very active. Look folks, it's a great time to be in Northern Australia, really. That's what this map shows. Great time to be in the Northern Australia and enjoying the monsoon. The Gascoyne region probably misses out in the next week, but once again, that'll all depend on how far west the NT low pushes. So over the next week, here's our rainfalls. So you can see really 50 mils plus anywhere along the coastline from St Lawrence northwards on the Queensland coast, and just really 50 millimetres plus from a line, as I said, from a line just south of Broome to pretty well Mackay, and including most of the inland areas in between that. So some really good signs there for some decent rainfall through most, if not all, of the northern half of the continent. If not so for us being cyclone chasers, we probably aren't looking at a chase anytime soon. But really, in the end, it's rain that we really need. Thanks for watching tonight. We'll have another update tomorrow. If things start to look like they're easing off, we may not update tomorrow, and we may update you on Friday. But at this stage, expect an update tomorrow night. Good night.